My name is Mary Purcell, and I'm originally from Buffalo, New York, and I'm passionate about conservative politics. I'm a junior humanities major at Ave Maria University outside of Naples, Florida. It is my honor to welcome our next speaker, Abby Roth. Abby Roth is the creator of Classically Abby, a YouTube channel and lifestyle brand that teaches about classic living and traditional values. In addition, Abby is a classically trained opera singer with a master's degree and professional study certification from the Manhattan School of Music. Abby transitioned to YouTube from opera when she realized the importance of sharing how to live a conservative life. With over 100,000 subscribers on YouTube, 80,000 followers on Instagram, and almost 80,000 followers on Twitter, Abby is spreading her message to young women and men everywhere. She has been a popular speaker for the Luce Institute in the past. Please help me in welcoming Abby Roth.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much to the Clare Boothe Luce Center for Conservative Women for hosting this amazing conference and having me here to speak. It's always a pleasure getting to speak to the next generation of young conservatives and especially young women like you. If you've noticed, I'm not speaking with a mic today because it is my Sabbath. I'm an Orthodox Jew, but I am a trained opera singer, as you mentioned, so I know how to project. Hopefully everyone can hear me. If you can't, let me know. Have you ever been told that dating is fun? Yeah, that's a lie. Dating is not fun. I have a couple of stories to illustrate that point. Number one, when I was in college, there was a guy who was very interested in me. And for a few reasons, I was not interested back. Number one was that I only date religious Jews, or rather Jews, and he wasn't Jewish. Number two was that I was at the time waiting to have sex until marriage. So I said to him, I just want you to know, I'm waiting to have sex until marriage. And his response was, how can you buy the car if you haven't test driven it? He did not convince me. Surprising absolutely no one. Number two, when I was dating a guy, this was at the last year of my college career. We were together for about 8 months, and we dated long distance for most of it, but near the beginning of our relationship, we were hanging out at my sister's apartment, and he went to the restroom, and he comes out, and he goes, Abby, we have a problem. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, we need to call a plumber. And I said, what is going on? And he said, the toilet is overflowing. We need a plumber right now. Well, it was 10:30 on a Saturday night, so we called 6 different plumbers, none of whom were open, ended up finding a 24-hour plumber to come and snake the toilet, and then spent the rest of the evening cleaning up my sister's floor. Now, to be clear, we stayed together for a while after that because that's not a reason to break up with someone, but it wasn't a great date story after that. But here's why dating is awful. When you're dating someone who isn't right for you, it's boring, it's stressful, it's depressing. When you're trapped at a table across from someone you don't like but you can't leave, well, that's stressful. When you're trapped on a date and there's no exit, it's kind of boring when that person and you don't get along. And when you get home from a date that you haven't enjoyed, it's depressing when you realize nothing's going to come from it. Think about a show like Emily in Paris. I don't know if any of you guys have watched it. The spiritual successor to Sex in the City. Every episode, Emily meets, falls for, sleeps with, and breaks up with a different guy in the beautiful city of Paris. And the one guy she's had feelings for all along, well, he's in a relationship with her close friend while he's making moves on her. Does any of this sound fun to you? When you're watching a show like that and it's got brightly oversaturated colors and beautiful Parisian cafe music, it does look very attractive. and they are going to downplay how upsetting that really is. But when I break it down for you, as I just did, it sounds pretty terrible. We are supposed to see this and think, wow, adventure. But it sounds not fun. And the women in shows who make it look so fun and great are the same women who wake up in a different man's bed every day and feel nothing but regret. So why am I starting here? Why am I talking about why dating stinks? Because by dating with purpose, dating for marriage, you'll like dating. Why? You'll enjoy dating. Once you're dating someone you enjoy. Once you find the guy that you really like and have a future with, then going on dates with him is the best thing in the world. You're getting to do fun things with a person who you connect with, enjoy, and have longevity with. There is nothing better. So today, I want to talk about how you can date the right person and have a heck of a good time doing it. Okay, number one, start with my patented, classically Abby theory of chemistry and compatibility. People talk about chemistry and compatibility all the time. I'm sure you've heard that before, but I talk about it just a little bit differently. There's your chemistry guy and your compatibility guy. Now, I've dated both, and many of you probably have, if you've dated in your life. Most people have had both of these guys before they meet the right guy, unless you dated in high school and met your high school sweetheart and then ended up together. So let's start with chemistry guy. My story with chemistry guy is probably going to sound similar to a lot of yours. It's the guy who you can stay up till 4 a.m. talking to. It's the guy who your personalities just mesh. It's easy. Like you cannot imagine how this wouldn't work out because you guys are perfect together. You enjoy all the same things. You enjoy each other immensely. Your personalities are perfect together. But there's no compatibility. There is no future there. You don't share values. Maybe he doesn't want to get married. Maybe he doesn't want children. Maybe he doesn't share your faith. Maybe there's no compatibility that will allow you to have a future together. But you tell yourself it doesn't matter. You tell yourself that the chemistry is good enough, you're gonna make it through this. You have to. Now, here's where we have to talk about passion. The way that media has portrayed love and passion is not really passion and is not really love. It's anxiety. Okay? What they're talking about is this feeling of, I cannot bear to lose this person. But why would you fear that unless there was a reason to fear it? You only fear that, you only live on that emotional roller coaster of, I just can't imagine my life without him, if you know that there's a very good chance that you won't end up together because the compatibility isn't there. But they call that passion. They call that love. They call that the burning fire, right? This feeling of like, I can't live without him. But that's not real. And that's not what's going to make a relationship last and bring you ultimate happiness. So this is the relationship that will break your heart because you cannot believe that this is going to end. And when it does, you have to recover. So that's chemistry guy. Now let's talk about compatibility guy. Compatibility guy is probably someone you were set up with, or maybe you met on through somebody who, in the Jewish community, we call it a shidduch. It's where somebody sets you up, like a professional sets you up, using a list of things to match you to. And on paper, you make perfect sense. It's like, of course you would get married, right? You both want 4 kids. You both want to live in the suburbs of Arizona with your parents. You both want to, whatever else it is. You both match perfectly. You share those things that are really, really important. But the chemistry just isn't there. So you probably will break up, and this isn't going to break your heart. But you'll kind of question it every now and then. You'll be like, should I have ended up with that guy? Did that make sense? We wanted all the same things. Is that what it's supposed to be like? It's not what it's supposed to be like, but that's going to be compatibility guy. The right guy has both. The right guy, you may not recognize it right away. Because with the right guy, it's going to feel calm. It's going to feel peaceful. It's going to feel like home. When you're with the right guy, you can stay up talking till 4 a.m. and you can see a future 20 years down the line. You know that you want all the same things and you love spending time with this person. It's not that passion anxiety thing because you're not ever worried you're going to lose this person. You're not going to question, what am I going to do without him? Because you don't even have to imagine it. Movies and TV have lied to you about what true love looks like because it always stops at the wedding or the couple getting together. The couples we see in modern media, they're all chemistry couples. There's a reason they break up like 15 times. There's a reason that Ross and Rachel only got together in the very last episode, right? They're a chemistry couple. And we don't see what happens once they're together and they're trying to raise their baby. Like, we don't know what happens, but it's probably not going to be great given the 10 seasons prior. So what happens after the marriage? We don't get to know. But if you find chemistry and compatibility in one person, then you'll know. You'll have longevity. Number 2, don't have sex before marriage. Over at the Institute for Family Studies, Nicholas Wolfinger, a sociologist at the University of Utah, has found that Americans who have only ever slept with their spouses are most likely to report being in a very happy marriage. Why does that make sense? When you treat marriage seriously, as the only means to having sex, then marriage is better. It's not casual. It's not something that can be broken at the drop of a hat. It's a lifelong commitment. When you treat marriage as something that is the ultimate fulfillment of your marriage, as opposed to really focusing on the wedding as a party that celebrates your love, and then you just go back to living together and having sex and all the things you were doing before you got married, then marriage is actually something that will last and be really joyful because you waited for it. You gave it the weight it deserved. People who have sex before marriage don't, especially with many partners, don't know why sex is unique with the partner that they've chosen to spend their life with. And it is unique. There's a reason that sex is something to be shared with one person from an emotional perspective, because there's about 500 other reasons why not, but from an emotional perspective, when you have sex with the one person that you love and you want to spend your life with and you want to raise a family with, that's what sex is about. It's not a physical act like eating soup. It's something that's about bringing emotional intimacy through physical intimacy. And the other thing that is great about, and the reason why more Americans report being happy in their marriages when they wait, is that they don't have the baggage that comes along with premarital sex. There's no comparisons. Were you better or worse than this person? There's no trauma. There's no problems that come with the multiple partners. There's no STDs. You have just each other to share this life with and grow together. Now, there are the practical reasons why sex needs to be in marriage. You won't constantly be getting hurt over and over again. You won't get STDs, as I mentioned. And sex is the building block of a family. And the real thing is, if you aren't ready to have a family, you aren't ready to have sex. If that guy is not the man you want to be the father of your children, you are not ready to have sex with him. Now, one of the great things about waiting to have sex is it weeds out the men who are looking for sex more than a relationship. As you saw in my first date story, it weeded him out pretty quick. It's really a wonderful way to find the person who wants to wait with you and gives sex the same importance that you do. Now, I have a book club on my Substack, shameless plug, where we've read a bunch of different books, and we started off with Cheap Sex by Mark Regnerus, and then we started kind of on a series focusing on this topic. Now, in Cheap Sex, he talks about how economically cheap sex has become, right? Any man can get sex pretty much from anywhere, and how this has hurt women more than anyone else. Feminism has told women that this is to their benefit, but it's only made it worse for women. Now the women who want to wait are being compared to the women who don't. And that's really hard. We also read The Case Against the Sexual Revolution, which is by Louise Perry. It just came out recently. She talks about sexual disenchantment, the idea that sex is nothing more than any other physical act, that it's not special. That's what we've come to in today's age. You can just do it with whoever, whenever, and it doesn't mean anything. But there's a reason that sex is different. Why do we differentiate between assault and sexual assault? Why? If there's no difference, why do we say that there is one? Because it is different. Because sex is a uniquely personal, intimate thing. So there's a difference between somebody punching you in the face and someone getting raped. It's important for us to know this, because when you take it to that, the scary side of things, it allows us to be clear about the not scary side, about the positive side, about why sex is really beautiful when it's done with the right person and not so when done with a random person. She also discusses the idea from C.S. Lewis, chronological snobbery. I don't know if you've heard that phrase, but I'm obsessed with it now. Chronological snobbery being the idea that we look back at the people who came before us and we think, well, they don't know as much as we do. We ignore where we came from. C.S. Lewis uses the analogy of a fence in the woods, that a leftist will see a fence in the woods and go, why is that there? Seems random. Let's get rid of it. A conservative will see a fence in the woods and say, I wonder why that's there. There may be a good reason for it. Let's try and figure it out. We, at this point in our history, are chronological snobs about the sexual mores that came before us. But there's a reason they worked. And there's a reason that things are really off the rails now. Feminists have lied to you and told you that you'll be empowered if you have sex, but they're wrong. In your folder, you were given a booklet from the Center for Conservative Women, Sense and Sexuality, and I'm going to read a little excerpt from it. A recent study of the hookup culture at Princeton University reveals, before the hookup, girls expect emotional involvement almost twice as often as guys. 34% hope a relationship might evolve. Guys, more than girls, are in part motivated by hopes of improving their social reputation or of bragging about their exploits to friends the next day. After the hookup, 91% of girls admit to having feelings of regret, at least occasionally. Guilt and feeling used are commonly cited, and overall, 80% of girls wish the hookup hadn't happened. The last book that I want to mention that we read is called The Joy of Intimacy by Rabbi Manis Friedman, and it turns all of this stuff in a positive direction. It talks about how true intimacy comes from treating sex as the physical embodiment of a deep emotional connection, and when you treat it that way, it's only the best experience. It's a lie that women are empowered through sex with people that don't care about them. It's not empowering or fulfilling to give unfettered access to your body, your heart, and soul to someone who isn't going to treat it like the treasure it is. It's not empowering to treat men like sex objects and to be treated like a sex object yourself. It's not empowering to have a long list of one-night stands, but no man who would actually provide for you and support you. If you want a relationship that has a future, you need to respect yourself enough not to waste your own time and share your body with someone who doesn't care about you. So don't have sex before marriage. Number 3, you can't choose who you love, but you can choose who you don't love. So what does that mean? When I was in college, there was a guy who really, really liked me. And he was a really good friend of mine, and I liked him too. I wasn't as careful as I should have been, and we spent a good amount of time together on our own and with friends. And both of us ended up developing feelings for one another. He more than I, but still I did too. And it wasn't fair to him, and it wasn't fair to me. But the way I could have stopped that is if I just not spent time with him. So when I say you can't choose who you love, what I'm saying is you can't make yourself love somebody who you don't have that connection with, right? We talked about that with compatibility guy. Didn't work out because you can't make yourself love someone. But you don't have to date chemistry guy. If you meet that guy who you are like, oh my gosh, my heart, it's fluttering, I have feelings, you don't have to hang out with him. Step away. Remove yourself from the situation. Don't lead on someone who you know you can't end up with, and don't be led on by someone who doesn't want to end up with you. And don't ignore red flags. This is different than not being compatible. This is different than not sharing values. This is the things that are, an actual red flag. Maybe he has anger issues or something. Don't ignore that, even if you have that chemistry. Step away. Remove yourself. Now, the hardest part about this is loneliness. I talk about this a lot. Loneliness is the number one cause of bad decision-making is loneliness. When you're in college, away from home, it's really easy to make choices to alleviate that loneliness. But spending time with somebody who you really like and then getting deeply involved with them, that person it will probably end in heartbreak. And that loneliness will only quadruple. It's much better to head it off at the pass. Make friends, build a community, go to church. Find people who you enjoy and who you want to spend time with so you can prevent that loneliness from creeping in. And then you won't make those bad decisions with a guy who's not meant to be with you. Because, you're bored, you go to your friend's house and you hang out. Go to their dorm room. Respect yourself by respecting your time. Date seriously so that you don't waste valuable years that you could spend getting to be an amazing couple with the person you end up with and then turn into amazing parents. Number 4, date someone who shares your faith, values, and vision of the future. But keep in mind that a man isn't always the finished product when you meet him. So when I met my husband, we asked the big questions early, right from the start. Maybe the second time we met. And worked out. We got engaged 5.5 months later and then got married a year under the day to when we started dating. Fast turnaround. But we were very clear with each other that we wanted to talk about that compatibility. But my husband was raised Reform Jewish, and I was raised Orthodox. Now, at the time, I was what we call off the derech, which means off the path, off the journey a little bit. I wasn't as observant as I am now. But I knew by the time I had children, I wanted to be keeping everything that I could so that I could raise my child in a religious Jewish home. So I said to my now husband, this is important to me. I want to be religious. I want to work on my faith. And by the time I have children, I want to be observant. And he said, okay, me too. And even though he wasn't the finished product when we met, and even though he needed to learn quite a bit more than I did, because for me, it was just returning to what I had known. For him, it was starting from scratch. He was intentional about wanting to be observant. And so I could give him the opportunity to prove that. So the first part of this is ask the big questions early, right? Now, I usually say you don't have to ask the big questions on the first date. Give yourself a chance to experience that chemistry, see if you guys hit it off. But by date number 2, ask those questions. Now, some people will say, oh, that's still too fast, but I'm a woman and I know that if I've had a good first date, by date number 2, I'm in it. I'm ready. I'm like, this is the guy. I love this man. And by date number 4, it's too late. You're gone. So date number 2 is a good time to ask those questions. And it doesn't have to be awkward. It doesn't have to be an interrogation. It can be brought up in a natural way. But why not ask those questions? What's the worst that's going to happen? He's going to say something that you don't like? Okay, great. He's not for you. Solution. And know what on your list is actually important. Now, there's a difference between the list that is important and the list that's not. The list that's not important. He better be 6 feet. He better be making 6 figures. These things don't matter. The things that matter are everything I've talked about before. Those compatibility questions. Does he want to have children? Does he want to get married? Does he share your faith? Learn from past relationships what you need and want from a relationship. Don't ever think that the dating that you've done in the past isn't going to inform you for the future. It's not a waste of time when it's done right, because it teaches you what you actually will need from a future spouse. I dated guys that I felt like every time we got in an argument, it wasn't about us trying to find a solution. It was about him trying to prove he was smarter than I was. So that became something on my list that was like number 2. Like, this better be really important. Number 1, okay, all the compatibility stuff. Number 2, don't try to prove you're smarter than me in an argument. Let's try to make this fruitful. I'm very blessed that that's what I found in my husband. Our disagreements are lovely because we always get to the end and we're like, okay, are we working together on solving this? Yes, great. But know that he doesn't have to be exactly where you want him to be when you meet. He can have the intention to grow. Now, that doesn't mean you're trying to change him. That's a different thing. You're not the one producing this. It's him doing it himself, but maybe he's just at the beginning of his journey. And that's okay. And that is still a very valid person to date. Number 5, and this is the last one. Love is a choice, each and every day. I was talking to my dad about this speech, and he mentioned something I thought was very interesting, and I want to include it. He actually said to me, I think you should include this, and I was like, yeah, that seems smart. So a lot of people think that you're going to date somebody, and then you're going to love them so much that you'll make the decision to get married. It's actually the reverse. You make the decision to get married, and then you meet the right person. If you're not ready to get married, when you meet that right person, it's not going to automatically turn on because that person is so great. You have to be there. You have to make that decision. It's an intentional choice that you've made. But truly, love is a choice generally. Have you ever seen the movie 7 Brides for 7 Brothers? This makes me happy. This is like one of my favorite movies. We would watch a movie with my family. It was a heavy drama. As I was like maybe 12, 13. We'd put on 7 Brides for 7 Brothers right after so that I could like decompress. That was how we would do it. And what's interesting about this movie is that this is a movie that begins with the marriage. It does not end with a marriage. It begins with it. So the story, for those of you who don't know, is that it occurs in 1850, and there's kind of a mountain man who comes into town, and he's there to find a wife, and he finds one. She's ready. They immediately have that chemistry, they have that compatibility, maybe a little faster than we're used to because it happens the same day, but they get married. And she and he start their journey back up into the mountains. And when she gets up there, she finds out he hasn't been entirely honest. He lives with his 6 brothers. So it's just her and 7 men. Now, she could leave. She could tell him, take me back to the town where I came from right this second. They haven't done anything. They could get it annulled. But she doesn't. She rolls up her sleeves. She makes dinner. And when the men run in to eat and start eating like pigs, she pushes the table over onto them and she says, I'm going to teach you how to be men. That night, when her husband comes into their bedroom, all ready, she says, you're sleeping in a tree tonight. And work through their relationship. for the entire film. It's not the main thing you're seeing. Really what you're seeing is Millie. If you want an example of strong femininity, strong womanhood, Millie is the example. But she spends the entire film turning these men who are just animals into civilized, wonderful people. That is what she does from beginning to end. And she and her husband work things out because she says, love is a choice. I'm going to make this work. We love each other, but it's not easy. Now that's a very extreme example, but from a less extreme example, when I got married, people will tell you that the first year of marriage is the honeymoon phase. For many of us, that's not true. The first year of marriage is really hard, especially if you're doing the things I'm recommending, not living together before marriage, not having sex before marriage. When marriage becomes this huge life commitment that you've never made before, and you're dealing with roommate problems, you're dealing with trying to figure out how to be clean when someone else is not, or vice versa. You know, you're trying to negotiate your life now, figuring out the compromises. The first year of marriage is hard, really, really hard. And you have to choose to love that person every single day. When he puts his clothes next to the hamper, not in it, you have to remember, no, this is my spouse and I love him. And it doesn't matter that he did something stupid today, whatever. And he's choosing to love me on the days where I burned every single thing I made. And I'm like, you have to eat it. There's nothing else. One of the things I like to talk about is there's this study I read a long time ago that if you are in a bad mood and you smile, your brain can't really wrap its head around the idea that you're doing something physically that is not matching what you're doing emotionally. So it'll raise your mood a little bit if you smile when you're sad. The same is true if you hug your spouse when you're not in the mood to give him a hug. Your brain can't wrap your head around the idea that like, oh, I love my spouse, but I'm giving him a hug right now. Like, oh, I must love him. Like, it's so important to remember that love is a choice. Because the people who don't know this think that when they're not feeling it, they can leave. That marriage isn't a commitment that's more than just, well, love made me feel good this week, and it doesn't make me feel good this week, so I want to go. You have to choose it, and you have to work. But it's always worth it. For those 2 days of frustration, 7 weeks, years, however long of life with that person is always worth it. So let's go over the 5 points. Number 1, start with my classically Abby theory of chemistry and compatibility. Number 2, don't have sex before marriage. Number 3, you can't choose who you love, but you can choose who you don't love. Number 4, date someone who shares your faith, values, and vision of the future, but keep in mind that a man isn't always the finished product when you meet him. And number 5, love is a choice, each and every day. Dating isn't fun, but it really can be. When you meet that person who you just absolutely adore spending time with, going on dates is awesome. And you don't get to do it much when you're married and you have kids. So take advantage of that time before, when he still, wants to put on something nice for you and you're still shaving your legs. Like, take advantage of that time. Take dating seriously. And if you do, you'll find your happily ever after. So if anyone has questions. Hi.
So this isn't really more about dating, but I don't mean to judge certain lifestyles, but just through college, a lot of my friends will have maybe conservative views, but they don't live a conservative life. So they'll go to parties and they're like, in college, I feel like that's how you meet shower after hearing that. I don't want to like kind of go out to those things to meet people and talk about loneliness. So just like finding people who not only have conservative values but also like live conservatively, and like how do we convince people who are like almost there with us but not quite.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so number one, what I'm going to say is you don't have to preference with, we don't judge certain lifestyles. Sometimes judgment isn't from a place of like, I judge you, but from a place of I want to help you because I can see that this isn't helping you. So don't feel bad about feeling that way. I've had many friends who I feel like I've judged them, but not in the sense of I don't want to be friends with them anymore. It's just that I want you to be happier and I want to help. So if you're asking how you can help those friends or how you can meet people outside of those situations. Both. Yeah. So number one is what I'll say to the second part. Volunteering is a really good way to meet people because the people who are going to be volunteering are going to be the same people who share your values. They're the people who don't want to go to the parties either. So finding certain causes that you care about and seeing if they have events, if they're holding certain things, and going to those events, going to volunteer, you probably will meet people at that. And then, of course, always going to church is a great way to meet people. As far as helping those friends, it's really sitting down with them and listening to them on the days when things aren't going so well, because that's going to happen more frequently than infrequently, that they're going to come back from a party and feel not so great about it. And when that happens, being there for them so they know that they can always listen to you, they can always come to you and hear you, and then saying, you know, I was reading something, I was listening to something, and I don't know that this is necessarily something that's going to bring you happiness and joy. Like, maybe let's go to do something else on a night where there's a party. If you want to go see a movie, let's do that. And give them other alternatives to this thing that they're doing now. And also just being kind and loving so that they know it's not coming from a bad place. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for the great speech. I was just wondering, I know it kind of depends a little bit on everyone's individual like circumstances, but when do you think like as a time frame kind of generally you should know like when you're dating someone kind of like when you want to marry them or like that you want to marry them?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. So I tend to be on the faster side of things. I think if you ask those big questions early and you have that chemistry, then, you know, giving yourself enough time to confirm that that's all true, but not so long that you're super deep into it and then you're breaking up. I don't think that 2 years is I think it's too long to just date. I think that you can date for a year and then be engaged for 6 months, but I think that spending 2 years finding that out is simply too long. And I think a lot of the time people wait that amount of time because they didn't ask the big questions early. So if you and the guy that you're dating understand that like you have those two parts to your relationship, you'll figure out on your own timeline when you're ready. Most people would not get engaged after 6 months, but that made sense for me and my husband. A lot of couples we know, it took them about a year. So takes about a year. That makes sense to me. Yeah.
I really enjoyed your speech. When do you think is a good timing for like you personally to bring the man to your parents?
Good question. Yeah. So, you know, I will say that I come from a very traditional background, right? I come from an Orthodox Jewish community. So for many of us, we grew up in the same community. So your parents know the kids anyway. Or for me, that wasn't the case. My husband met my parents right before we got engaged. So I think that's like, if you do a couple months before you, or once you start discussing marriage seriously, even if you're not engaged yet, that's a good time to introduce, because now it's serious enough that you know that there's future there. And if your parents, you know, you've been talking to him and they get a good feeling about it and they don't feel concerned so that they want to meet him earlier, then I think they'll be understanding of that too.
That's great. Hi, first of all, your speech is amazing.
Oh, thanks.
My question is, for people who have experienced sexual assault, like Glenn, how do you affirm that there is hope for into these, subpar relationships, how do you affirm them that there is hope?
That's a great question. And I have many friends. I personally experienced sexual assault, so I understand it. They need to realize that their worth as a person hasn't diminished at all. And that's really the big thing, is that a lot of the time when somebody's been sexually assaulted, their first feeling is, well, I'm worthless. And they're not, obviously. So I think being so kind and loving when they've been in that situation and saying, now, moving forward, you know your worth. Know how worthy you are. You know how special and important you are. And the only man who's ever going to get to touch you is somebody who knows how worthy you are too. And I think that carrying that forward, that confidence that I'm only ever going to be in a safe situation with someone who loves me, cares about me, wants to share a future with me, I think that gives women a confidence that they're going to be safe, okay, and make good choices. And they can trust themselves. If they're one of the things I want to mention is that feminism has encouraged women to ignore their own intuition when it comes to being around bad men, right? Because you should sleep with whoever. Oh, you're interested in this guy? He's hot? Great, go for it. No. If you feel something in the pit of your stomach that makes you go, trust it. And the friends that you have that have experienced this, they can trust that feeling as long as they've also, dealt with it in therapy and things like that so that they aren't just afraid of men generally. But I think that is the first thing that you should talk about with them is that they're worthy.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Hi. Thank you for your speech. I think we all really appreciated it, and a testament to that is like the line of questions that are here. I guess my question is, because I really appreciated and thought that your distinction between compatibility and chemistry was helpful, because I never actually heard that before. But I guess my question is, in reconciling those two things, because you said in your future spouse, those two things are supposed to be reconciled. You're supposed to find both. But my question is, I guess we're told, as women, as Christians, that we're supposed to meet people where they're at and work with them.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just wondering, compatibility wise, if you have the chemistry that's there, how do you, I guess, unlock? Are we supposed to unlock the compatibility, or is that something that's just already supposed to be there and you aren't really supposed to work for it?
That's a really great question, and I understand where it's coming from. I would say that this sort of goes in line with whether or not this is a person you're trying to change, or whether this is a person who's already made the intention or already has the intention to change. If you're hitting it off with somebody who has been very clear that he does not believe in God or that he doesn't want to get married and have kids, that's not a relationship that's not a person you can change. And you can't, he may change on his own in the future. But at this point, you can't be the person to change, and you don't want to waste your time being the person who has to change him. So accepting somebody, I would say accepting them for where they're at also means accepting them for where they're at. And saying that the timing may not have been right for us, but that means there's a person for me who's different and a person for you who's different. And by the time you're ready to make those choices and changes, it's not going to be with me. And it's a hard pill to swallow, but it's honestly, it's just the truth. And it's when you meet the person you're supposed to end up with, then you'll realize in retrospect, this wasn't the right person. I've always said, my husband and I, if someone had told me when I was 18 that this was the guy I was going to marry, I would have been like, really? Okay. But by the time I was 23, and that was when we met, by the time I was 23 when we met, it made sense. If we had met at 18, it would not have. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for your talk. You spoke about how important it is to talk about the big things at the beginning, get those set up, but also that you can't expect the end result when you meet him, and that people will grow. Obviously, throughout your dating, and if you get married, throughout your whole marriage. But issues that you don't need to have, reconcile at the very beginning, but you should before you get married.
Can you give an example? Do you have an example on
I do
hand?
have an example personally. My boyfriend, he's conservative, but not really an American conservative. He grew up in England, and he isn't against gun rights, but he doesn't really get the whole Second Amendment importance very much. He's opposed to it. He doesn't quite understand it. And I'm wondering if you consider things like that to be like, oh, you should probably have those medium-sized issues figured out before you get married, or if you can expect that as long as they're open to it, that can develop.
I would say with an issue like that, being open to it would be enough for me, because if he's not anti it, if you and he are both informed politically, and you're seeing things in the news, you're discussing it as a family, as you have children, you'll see that people generally become more conservative over time as they have families. People want to protect their families. They want to protect their children. I mean, think about things like trans rights, like that stuff. Once you have kids, becomes non-negotiable, because they're now risking the health and lives of your children. So you're like, no, we're not talking about this. This isn't even something I'm going to entertain. Something like gun rights, I think, especially like you said, he's not anti-gun rights. It's something that I think over time will change. It doesn't necessarily have to be completely solved before you're married, as long as he's open-minded, you're having good conversations. These are things that he's, thinking about becoming more conservative over time. Yeah.
Thank you for your talk. I just had a question. I was wondering if you think men and women can be friends, or if one is always looking at the same more.
It's a good question. I've definitely talked about this before. I will say that I don't think that men and women can be friends unless it's a situation where it's like couple friends. Like, I'm friends with my husband's friend and his wife is friends with you know what I mean? Like, we're all friends with each other. And so if we run into each other when we walk around the neighborhood, because we live in the same neighborhood, like, I'll talk to the husband because there's no risk there. Like, it's just that we all know where we're at. But when you're in college, there is generally going to be a situation where one person has more feelings than the other. I don't know if you've ever seen that study. Yeah, you probably know the one I'm talking about, but I'll mention it. There's a study where they asked men, they had a young woman, an attractive young woman, walk up to men on campus rather, and say, like, would you like to go to bed with me tonight? 100% of men said yes. When the same thing was flipped, 0% of women said yes. There's also another study that they did on college campuses where they had men and women who were friends go and talk to the researchers, and I think it was something like 100% of the men were like, yeah, I'd probably sleep with her. So men are always going to be thinking, if you're just a little too friendly, like, oh, maybe this is what that means. Maybe we could be more, maybe. And often as a woman, you can get feelings for a guy and then not remove yourself from the situation. And then you're in the thing I was talking about here, where you're choosing who you don't love and not choosing, you know what I mean? You're spending time with someone who you shouldn't. So if you can avoid it, I would say avoid it, and try and find girlfriends that you really enjoy.
Thank you.
Hi, so I was wondering if you support dating in college, because a lot of time everybody hears, oh, don't date in high school because you're still young, but also you have to wait a really long time before you be getting married. But like, to give an example, if my boyfriend and I have been together for 2 years, and you say waiting 2 years is kind of a long time, but I'm also only a sophomore in college, so I'm still expecting to wait until graduation. But I'm wondering if you support dating in college, and would discourage waiting that long, or what your thoughts are on that.
So I am a huge proponent of dating in college. I think it's a great place to meet people. I think often it's the easiest place to meet people, and once you get out of college, it's a lot harder. Now, I totally see your point as far as, oh, you want to wait until you're out of college to get married. So here are a few thoughts I have on that. Generally, the reason I encourage people not to date for forever is that it's stressful. It's a stressful situation to be in when you're not entirely committed. And you're kind of like, oh, well, we can't sleep together, and that puts a stressor on relationships after a while. And especially if you have really good chemistry. And then it's also just being on the edge of the diving board, like waiting to jump in as far as commitment. Longevity in relationships that don't turn into marriage, even if they're good relationships, can cause things to kind of fray. So that's why I'm not a huge proponent of long dating relationships. I'm also a proponent of getting married in college. It's hard to do. But if you can do it, and if your families are on board and they understand, and you can get a little help from each side, but that also you guys work. I mean, we live in a culture now where college, you're not supposed to work. It's like a party. You're supposed to go to college and party. But for a very long time, people got married in college and would have jobs and would support themselves and do both. So I tend to say, if you guys are ready, then get married. And if your parents are on board, then get married. And if not, then just be very, very caring and understanding towards each other for the time that you're waiting, because it can be so hard to wait to get married and live together and all that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much, and have a good lunch.